Well, good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM News Talk Radio. I had the pleasure of interviewing my mom on Art Appreciation a week ago, and I've got on the video link for the show over 5,000 views. And I had a bunch of comments that people said, bring back your mom, bring back your mom. So I thought for Easter, I'd bring back my mom. And instead of talking about just art in general, I said, it's Easter, let's talk about some religious art, and maybe she could give us a sense of some religious art. So Mom, you're back. Welcome. How are you? Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you, Brian.
Nice to see you.
Thinking about Easter and the fact that you won't be coming, I thought about how we always seem to think about our Easter family dinner.
Yep.
So let's start off with the Last Supper.
Okay, 1 second. I've just got to figure out the technology here. Can you see that?
Yep. Thank you.
So tell us about this painting.
Well, in the first place, it's absolutely enormous. It is about 4 meters high and 8 meters wide. It's by Leonardo da Vinci, and it was probably done about 1498 to 1500. We know that Leonardo da Vinci was an inventor, a great thinker, and probably a perfectionist. And when he got this commission, he knew it was going to be difficult to do. So instead of doing it in the usual manner for a fresco, which is painting into wet plaster, where your colors are tempera and actually blend right into the wall, become part of the wall, he decided that he was going to cover the wall up with gesso and paint on top of it with oil paint, with the result that about 7 years later, it began to crumble. So the painting that we see now has probably been repaired a dozen or more times.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's kind of too bad that we can't see all of the details, because there are a lot of interesting details in this picture. First of all, here's Jesus in the center, calm, both arms stretched out. His figure makes an interesting sort of triangle, lit from behind by a window. He's centered in that window, and you can actually see a landscape back behind his head. And the disciples are grouped in little groups of three on one side, three on the other side. And they're all sort of gesticulating in strange manners, because Jesus has just said to them, one of you will betray me. Now, I'll ask you, Brian, can you figure out which one is Judas?
No, I can't.
Well, if you look carefully, you'll see that one of the disciples or apostles' head is a little bit lower than any of the others. And in front of him, he has spilled the salt shaker.
So 3 to the left of Jesus.
Correct. Well done. The only other one that's fairly easy to see is to Jesus' other side. The second, or the first head over actually, is a finger pointing upwards. How about St. Thomas? St. Thomas saying, I'm not going to recognize you until I put a finger in your wound.
Oh, okay.
As to the others, I just think it's interesting that he's chosen to put them all on the same side of the table. Now, the perspective in this painting is really interesting because you're not that aware of it. But if you look at the black symbol, I guess, doorways on either side, do you see how they appear to get on a line? They're sort of both receding on both sides.
Yep.
There's actually a vanishing point, which is something you don't have to know about, but we're slightly aware of it. The lines kind of all lead down to Jesus' head.
Yep.
Now, if he had put some of those apostles on our side of the table, because the painting is so huge, the ones on this side of the table would have to be significantly larger than the ones on the far side of the table.
Yep.
And we would assume that they were more important. So putting them all on the other side of the table, not only are they all facing us instead of having their backs to us, they're all of the same importance. I think you've probably got a quick picture behind it that shows what it looks like in the refectory in Milan, where it's actually in place. There, that gives you an idea of the size of the painting. People in there having a look at it.
Sorry,
So
where is this?
In Milan, in Italy.
And this is at the end of one gallery.
And actually, it was, yes. It's not, I don't believe it's a gallery. I think it is a Catholic monastery. And this was their dining room. And his commission was to decorate the end wall.
And so this is the famous Last Supper by Michelangelo.
That's the famous Last Supper by Michelangelo.
Awesome.
Now let's move on to a sculpture, which is also very famous, the Pietà by Michelangelo. Pietà sort of translates to pity, but we would say more compassion. And it's Mary with Jesus in her lap. This is in a church in Rome. It's white marble, and it's a beautiful, beautiful sculpture. Actually, it was attacked by a crazy lunatic, I guess, about 10 years ago. So it's now behind bulletproof glass. When I was there more than 10 years ago and saw it, there was nothing between you and it. And it is just absolutely so lifelike, it's amazing. But it's interesting because Mary's face is very, very young. He's copied a young, attractive looking Roman matron. And you think, is she really old enough to have a son the age of Jesus at that time?
Right.
The folds in her drapery are gorgeous. But if she stood up, she'd be even taller than Jesus.
Yep.
And his figure, a dead person, rigor mortis obviously hasn't set in because he's curved across her lap. And yet it all works. You look at it and you almost gasp at the beauty of that statue.
It is beautiful.
A number of artists chose to, in a sense, copy it. And I think you've got a slide of a Van Gogh. Yeah. Now, look at the difference. Here you've actually got a picture that shows you sort of the entrance of the tomb, which supposedly was carved out of a rock.
Right.
Mary behind him again with billowing clothing, blowing in the wind. Interesting coloring, that glow in the sky behind, the yellow and the blue, and a warm light on Jesus' body, and the direction of her arms reaching out to enclose him, and the look on her face. You really do feel here the pity of a mother weeping over her dead son. I love that. I think of Van Gogh and all the pictures he did of flowers and whatnot. This is one of the few religious paintings that he did.
Where is this hanging?
I believe it's in the Van Gogh Gallery in Amsterdam.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's one that does travel around a bit. It can be very annoying when you go to a gallery to see something specifically and you find it's on loan somewhere else. However, more people get to see it. Now let's move on. What have you got next? You've got Doubting Thomas, I think. This by Caravaggio. Caravaggio, an interesting painter from the high Renaissance in Italy. Very emotional painter. Used dark shadows and bright highlights. And he tended to take models of just ordinary people on the street. And if you look at Thomas, you can see his thumbnail outlined in dark.
Yep.
Dirty hands. He picked a laborer who's putting his finger into the wound on Jesus' side. But again, I think it's interesting the way he's arranged those four figures. I often say you want three pictures in a composition. You don't want four. But here, we still see a triangle. The bald head of one of the figures back behind pulls the light and pulls us up to that part of it. And then we're almost lost in the darkness behind him and around and even between the figures. Jesus' head looking down to see what's going on. And look how carefully he's painted those fingers. They're so expressive, right in the middle, and the frown lines on the bodies, the two men, we don't know who the other two are, whether they're other disciples or whether it's just our doubting Thomas here. This is called a chiaroscuro, when you have these dark, dark shadows almost swirling around, an emotional feeling to the picture.
What a difference from the prior one.
Yeah. I've always loved Caravaggio's paintings. He didn't live for very long. I think he was about 40 when he died, so there are very few of his paintings around. But I've got one more by him. Next one. Yeah. This is the Conversion of St. Paul. And it is a little bit harder to see in reproduction. But the story is that Saul, who was persecuting Christians, was on the road on horseback, on the road to Damascus, and he was suddenly struck by a bright, bright light and fell down off the horse. And he was blind, I can't remember this story, for a couple of days anyway. And of course, when light dawned, he had become a Christian. He realized that Jesus had reached to him saying, "Why do you persecute me, Saul? I'm going to call you Paul." And he became Paul, and he became one of the foremost figures of the Christian church. You've got Roman soldiers who've been accompanying him on this trip, absolutely amazed by what's going on. You've got a lot of drama here, but again, you've got these highlights and dark, dark shadows, which give you sort of a feeling of terror almost, but motion going on through the picture.
Who was that reaching down to him? Is that Jesus reaching down to him?
I don't think so. I think that's just somebody from the crowd.
But he's there blinded and topless.
Yeah. Interesting little bits of color too around his body.
Yep.
So you're aware that this is the main sort of subject of the picture, even though it's right down at the bottom of the page. And the strength of the horse, which is the hindquarters really of the horse, and the horse's head seems to be turned back over his shoulder. You've noticed that?
Yeah.
I mean, even the horse is terrified of what's going on. So a lot of the early religious pictures were trying to tell a story. Remember, a lot of people didn't have access to a Bible. They couldn't read, or the Bible was in Latin. It's a way of bringing the stories of the Bible to the local people.
Right.
Many of the paintings do that. I'm not quite sure whether we go right to the jurors. From here, I think we've got a juror next, a German lithograph. No, we've got Magdalene. Yep, no, that was the Magdalene. This is a painting that I've actually seen in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. And I've always remembered it because it sort of, the image of it was burnt on my memory, you might say. I stood and looked at that picture for a long, long time. The repentant Magdalene is fingering a skull, the only light in the room. This is by Georges Latour, by the way. She's looking into a mirror. She's fingering the skull, and the whole thing is lit by a candle, and the light of the candle is reflected in the mirror off to her left there.
Oh, really? Beautiful.
It's just very interesting the way he plays with the light. Again, part of the story from the Bible. Mary Magdalene, there are a lot of Marys mentioned in the Bible, but Mary Magdalene was one of the ones who actually supposedly went to the tomb and was horrified to discover it was empty.
Right.
She and Mary, the mother of Jesus, were the two Marys they're sometimes referred to at the tomb, finding that Jesus had risen. But this just moved me, I don't know, a great feeling of spirituality here, as if she's giving up a lot of things. She's going to put down her jewelry. I think you can see there's a pearl necklace or something that she's put down on the table, and she's staring at the flame as if this is her faith, and she's now going to follow Jesus. All right, onward. What have you got next? Oh, I went to the English painters looking for religious pictures, and what did I find but a landscape painter, Constable, doing a picture of Salisbury Cathedral. But isn't it a beautiful landscape? I mean, it's a lovely, lovely cathedral. And if you look carefully off to the left, you'll see the bishop with his wife walking in the garden. Plus, off to the right, you've got cows drinking from the stream. The spire of the cathedral is framed by the graceful trees curving up around it, a dramatic sky back in behind. So when you're considering your faith, think about the churches that we go to and how you perhaps think of the church. I think the idea in these Gothic style churches was that the spire was reaching up to heaven. There's a cross shown very, very tiny right at the very top of the spire. But a lovely landscape picture, which I threw in just to make a difference from some of the dramatic Italian paintings that we've been looking at.
What era would this be, Mom?
I probably got a date for it, 18 something or other. Yeah, I think 1830, 1840 in England. Whereas the Italian pictures we were looking at were 14 and 1500s.
Right.
Sorry, I haven't been giving you dates as we've been along. I should have. That's why I say when you go and look at these pictures, you need to look at the signs beside them so you know the dates. Now, this is Dürer engraving, and I wanted to show it to you partly as a different technique to get away from some of these oil paintings. Dürer was a famous German engraver. He was also a painter. This is St. Jerome in his study. Engraving is done by a sharp tool cutting into a copper plate. And then the copper plate is covered with a type of wax. And then acid is poured over it so that the ink is only going to bite into where the lines have been cut out. So you can imagine that it probably took him 2 or 3 years anyway.
Right.
To complete something this intricate. It's a beautiful, beautiful sketch. This is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York.
Beautiful.
The lion right at the very front of the picture is used as a symbol for St. Jerome. St. Jerome is famous, of course, because he transcribed the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate. So supposedly ordinary people, ordinary ministers anyway, could read the Latin. There's a skull in the window at the side.
Yep.
The details of the window are interesting. I guess the fact that he had a glass window, there's soft light coming in through the window. And again, the perspective here is fascinating. Even the beams on the ceiling coming forward give you that, drawing us into the room, into the depth of the room. You know, an artist is working on a two-dimensional flat surface, and yet they manage to create a space that we feel we can almost walk into.
You do. There's no question.
The table that he's working on looks almost like a drafting table that's slightly tilted, so he could probably use it while he was at work. I'm not sure whether he's working here or reading. But let's look at the next picture now. which should be a painting by Dürer of the same subject, St. Jerome again. But it doesn't move me quite the way that the etching does, or engraving, sorry. Again, we've got this skull. People seem to, artists seem to like to include skulls just so we're reminded of death. And there's a crucifix with Jesus hanging on it, looking quite lifelike Jesus up on his other side. And he's questioning life or death and reading from a book, maybe the Bible that he has been transcribing. And down right at the front of the picture, there's an inkwell with a quill sticking out of it. He's used up all of the space.
So these two are the same artist, the same subject matter,
Right.
two very different mediums.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
This would be oil on canvas. And I'm not sure where it is.
Okay, here he's bald, isn't he?
Well, I think he's got a cap on his head, actually.
Oh, okay. And there's no crucifix.
But he does have, well, I think there is a crucifix hanging on the wall between the windows. But he does have an aura of light, whether it's a halo or not. There's certainly a glow above his head here. So you know he's just not an ordinary schoolmaster. Interesting for people that are working in an office.
There's the cap.
There's the cap, yeah.
And you've got a quill in both, I guess. Or at least the inkwell, maybe not the quill. Here he's got the quill in his hand.
Right.
Here he's got the quill in the inkwell.
Inkwell, yeah. Interesting to compare the two and think.
It is.
Yeah,
Okay, and you wanted to do something Canadian?
Yes. The Northern Nativity by William Kurelek. Now this is actually a little book that Kurelek produced. And around Christmas time, if you can find it, it has a number of different nativity scenes, all set in Canada with Indigenous people in it. And I love it. I love the fact that he's showing sled dogs back behind, the midnight sky. I think there's even Aurora Borealis shining in the sky back behind. Part of an igloo cut open to show a mother and child setting. Kurelek was a very intriguing man, interesting painter. His parents, a Manitoba painter. His parents had come from Poland, I think. I'm not sure. But he was born in Canada, I believe. Had trouble making ends meet. Painted quite a lot of pictures with discouraging mushroom clouds up above saying our world is doomed. Made his own frames, handmade frames on a lot of his pictures.
Oh, really?
But anybody who has a child they want to buy a book for Christmas, I recommend The Northern Nativity by William Kurelek. Fascinating little book.
Well, this has been interesting, Mom. I think the one that's probably got the most significance is The Last Supper.
Probably.
And it really is a beautiful painting. But I tell you, the one that impressed me the most is Doubting Thomas. Yep.
Yes, it is fascinating. Emotional details come out in it. You really do get that feeling of a religious fervor that you don't get, I think, from any of the others.
Yeah. Well, I think, this one certainly has the religious fervor. And I wanted to surprise you one because you showed me one statue. So I wanted to surprise you with the statue that I visited both last year when I toured Italy, but also a couple of years ago that I found so unbelievably impressive. And this is this one. Do you know this one?
Oh, I've been there. I've seen that one. Yeah. Saint Teresa of Avalon. Yeah, of Avila. Yeah, Saint Teresa, a very, very interesting Carmelite nun from Spain, actually. Came from a wealthy family and gave it all up to go into a Carmelite order of sisters. Yeah, here she's pictured. This is by Bernini, and it is a sculpture, but I think Bernini said that it was a sculptural picture. He designed the entire chapel for this sculpture, so that you've got interesting light coming from back in behind, shining on those golden rays. And we have a little angel holding an arrow, which is piercing the heart of Saint Teresa. Her robes are very contorted, bare feet, 1 foot hanging down. Lovely, lovely light coming in. There's 2 sort of boxes on either side, as I recall, up higher, that you don't get, with members of the family that donated the money for it. Bernini was a very interesting man. He was 6th, I think it was, in a family of about 13. And his father was a well-known sculptor in Naples. And by the age of 10, Bernini was actually helping his father.
Isn't there a whole garden for Bernini sculptures in Rome?
Bernini was famous for a lot of the work right around the Vatican. The big baldacchini over the tomb of St. Peter's,
right,
which is as high as a 4-story building, I think they say, was designed and built by him. I'm not sure whether there's a whole, he didn't do an awful lot of sculptures. He was almost more well known for his architectural work, although one of the fountains, the fountain of the rivers in Rome, is also by Bernini. But it seems if we want to see the artistic peak of religious work, we almost have to go to Italy to see it.
Yeah.
Now you can go to Ghent and see the Ghent altarpiece, which is by the Van Eyck brothers. So there's various ways of looking at the Bible stories through art.
Well, I'm surprised you didn't take me to the Sistine Chapel.
How would you do that in one small lecture? It would take a lot longer.
Well, I guess it's also architecture, and well, it's painting.
Oh,
it's
sure.
painting on a ceiling, isn't it?
Yes, yes. But how would you try to describe that? I mean, it's almost beyond words.
Well, I'll have to get a picture up and ask you to describe it then.
Okay. But
well, that was wonderful.
That's your tour for today.
That's my tour of religious art for Easter.
Right.
Thank you so much. And what are you going to be doing? Now, you're not going to church, so are you going to be doing church by Zoom?
Oh, yes. Well, actually, Orleans United Church has been putting everything on their website. What did I say it was? I should be forecasting it for you, shouldn't I? We had a wonderful, absolutely magnificent Good Friday service this morning from them, following the Stations of the Cross.
Fantastic. And what about, you've heard that Pavarotti is singing from an empty cathedral somewhere.
Well, that would be worth listening to, wouldn't it?
It would be. Okay, well, thank you so much for that description of religious art, Mom. I really appreciate it.
Well, that's a very, very small sampling for you, but familiar things, I hope.
Well, particularly the Last Supper.
You'll go back again and see some of the Caravaggio works.
I will.
Good.
Have a great Easter.
Happy Easter to you and your family.
Thanks so much, Mom. Bye-bye.